and convening the regular meeting of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. We're joined, my name is Marquise Harris Dawson. I am the co-chair of this committee representing the 8th District. The other co-chair is Councilmember Jose Huizar. We're joined by members Kern Price, Mike Bonin, and Gil Cedillo. We want to thank everybody for being here. It's an exciting day here in Los Angeles and in these chambers. But before we call up the staff to begin the discussion, I want to just say on behalf of the co-chairs and all the members of the committee how grateful we are for all of the time, care, brain power, checking, double-checking, and triple-checking that went into the drafting of the comprehensive strategy that we've released. We understand that this was a major endeavor because we're moving from having zero strategy and working in silos to proposing a truly comprehensive strategy. What's in front of us on paper is ambitious, but it appropriately combines near-term strategies with longer-term approaches. It's been developed collaboratively with the county, but it also makes a clear assessment of what the City of Los Angeles' roles and responsibilities are in this complex regional issue. The development of this report would not have been possible without the many meetings of this committee and the valuable input that has been provided by the committee, its members, those of you who attended committees and gave public comments, and those of you who met with us in between meetings to give comments over the past 6 months. Accordingly, I want to acknowledge and thank our Council President, Herb Wesson, for giving us this opportunity through the creation of this standing committee. We have also had critical input and support from our mayor's office in Los Angeles County, the community of service providers, and also the community of homeless advocates. Again, we want to thank everyone as we move forward. The document that we have in front of us is a wide-ranging one, so I want to talk a little bit about how we'll go through today's meeting to deal with this very meaty content. The co-chairs today, we're requesting that we focus on the strategy and programmatic content. Where you have budget or financing questions for informational purposes, please feel free to ask them, but we generally want to hold off until our next meeting, which will be on January 27th in these chambers to talk about the budget piece of the program and strategy. The report is broken up into 10 sections. We'll go through it by section by section to identify any clarifications or suggested changes that members have. In each section, please let us know which strategies you'd like to call special. And if there are strategies that don't relate to a specific recommendation, we'll give time at the end of reviewing the whole plan to add additional strategies or reports that you would like to consider. We'll tentatively take any items not called special by members today on consent, pending any technical changes or clarifications that might be made in time for the final adoption of the strategy at our next meeting. Also, before we finalize the meeting, we will take public comment on the front end, which will allow us to incorporate any compelling comments that we might receive during that time period. For technical amendments or simple clarification, members are also invited to send them to the CLA or CAO in writing. Please do so as soon as you can this week. You're welcome to raise clarifications and edit today, but we don't want to spend our time in this meeting dotting I's or crossing T's and making small corrections. On one final note, many of these recommendations relate to departments and issues that are of interest to other council committees, whether it be most notably housing, but also plum, personnel, public safety, or health and mental health. As the reports come back to detail the implementation of any specific recommendation, it is to be expected that those interested committees will have the opportunity to hear those specific items. Many of the recommendations relate to housing and land use, so it's important to launch these recommendations. We have the input of the chairs of the Housing Committee, who is also a member of this committee, and the chair of Plum, who's also a member of this committee. That said, we seek to launch the strategy quickly and to get started on the report and implementation designs as soon as we possibly can. And we remain in urgent response mode to address the crisis situation we see today, especially as our weather has taken a turn. So we'll ask Mr. Santana and Ms. So to come up and make a very brief presentation before we go in depth, and then they'll be followed by Peter Lynn.
Good afternoon, Miguel Santana, City Administrative Officer. We have a very brief PowerPoint to sort of go over the overall concepts behind the report. We won't go through every single recommendation until your committee asks specific questions on particular items. So proceeding with the first page, as you know, throughout this process, we've been coordinating with the County of Los Angeles. Our reports were released at the same day, and they're being heard, but the county started a hearing earlier today to present their findings and their report to the community. That hearing is proceeding and should be expected to be done in about an hour. And of course, you're having your committee. You're anticipated to have an additional committee on the 27th. And then it is expected at this point that both the city and the City Council and the Board of Supervisors will be considering these items on February 9th. At the heart of what we're trying to do here is really look at this issue in the most comprehensive way, and starting with the identification of the issues that cause homelessness in the first place, looking at dealing with the issue of housing, and there's a number of recommendations that try to facilitate and expedite the expansion of affordable housing throughout the city. And in the county systems, really looking at some of the systems, the gaps in their systems that often create homelessness, gaps in the foster care system, healthcare system, justice system. And of course, we also know there are other issues that are unique to specific individuals that relate, that are factors in resulting in someone being homeless. The center of what we're proposing, working closely with LAHSA and of course the United Way, is the expansion of the coordinated entry system, which really connects one individual with a homeless individual and subscribes to a philosophy of whatever it takes to help that individual into the right kind of housing. And so the coordinated entry system has been identified as part of the best practices, not just here in Los Angeles, but around the country. And it's currently in place, being managed and implemented by organizations in the community specializing in the special needs of specific constituencies in the homeless broader community. And so we recommend expanding that program. Both the city and the county have made the same recommendation, working through LAHSA to expand the capacity of case managers so that we're in a better place to identifying the specific needs of homeless individuals and connecting them to the proper services. We all know that this is a difficult task, and that requires a level of compassion and persistence, but we believe that this is actually central to moving people from the street into housing. Of course, with the coordinated system, it's only as effective as the corresponding housing. And a big part of this report talks about the expansion of housing capacity for the homeless individuals. And we lay out a recommendation about how to do that for the immediate term, but also ultimately in the long term in over 10-year period. And we talk about it in a variety of different kinds of housing that would be needed. All of the players here involve the city, the county, LAHSA, and of course the nonprofit community to ensure that it's done in a coordinated fashion. So going back to the next slide, there are four main components. Preventive strategies, as I mentioned earlier, centralized case managing, housing, and then ongoing support mainly provided by the nonprofit community and the county. We spend a lot of time trying to clarify roles and responsibilities, going on to slide 5, because at the end of the day, homelessness is an issue that involves all levels of government. It involves the nonprofit community and involves LAHSA. And oftentimes the challenges with a comprehensive strategy is lack of clarity as to roles and responsibilities. Working closely with all of the various sectors, we've reached a consensus as to what each level of government and the nonprofit community can do to implement this plan. I won't go through all of it, but if you look at the city's role, specifically our responsibility is to help fund the coordinated entry system in partnership with the county, using LASA as a vehicle to ultimately fund the nonprofit providers that will do that system. In housing and land use, we have a specific responsibility specifically on establishing mechanisms to fund housing and create a plan to expand overall affordable housing for this population. We're recommending using current vehicles that exist both at the county as well as to LASA to expand the capacity of vouchers. Some of this work relates to wages and employment. Your council has already done by increasing the minimum wage, and of course through public services, we could specifically focus on the way we interface with the homeless community through our various law enforcement agencies and other departments. The heart of the report really is about housing, and we spend a lot of time talking about the various kind of housing that is necessary to meet sort of the goal of functional zero, which means that the time in which someone is homeless is very limited. We are recommending that there be a significant infusion of dollars to build a capacity of vouchers so that we can move people into housing as quickly as possible. At the same time, there also needs to be a plan and a funding source to build the housing itself. And so in many ways, we're talking about two different kinds of funding streams that have different kinds of requirements. The first one is our flexible dollars that could be used for a number of different purposes. The second is specifically for the housing, the construction of housing. We all know that it's going to take time to do the kind of development that's necessary. And so in order to house people in the short term, we're recommending that there be that immediate infusion. In the next chart, we show how that actually gets allocated in terms of overall cost. And as you've all read, the price tag is not a cheap one. We estimate that based on this plan, it would require about $1.8 billion over the next 10 years to fund all of the elements of this program. And we present in this chart how that would be done. The source of funds and the kinds of funds vary depending on where we are and what stage we are in the development of this program. Of course, it's important to know that specifically in the area of construction, the investment that the city makes gets matched by other sources of funds, often 4 to 1. So to the extent that we are able to identify funds for construction, the city is able to leverage those dollars in a very significant way, particularly using various tax credits, private investment. We've all seen the proposal that was recently announced by the state senate and of course federal grants to help build the infrastructure of housing. So with that, I won't go into all of the specific strategies, but we do list out nearly 50 different strategies, both immediate, short-term, and long-term, that help make a significant contribution in reducing the level of homelessness that we have today. Using the principles that we laid out around prevention, strengthening the overall case management system, expanding housing, and of course, developing a mechanism to connect people to the services that they need. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Miguel. So this is actually the culmination of work that was done by the City Council, as well as coming from motions submitted by council members, 51 strategies over 8 different topic areas. These are only ideas and proposals for you to consider. There is no strategy until this council and mayor approve it. So we would suggest that as we adopt these strategies, that we publish a final document at the end of this process so that we can actually guide the implementation efforts as well as monitor the status and evaluate progress. One of the things that we had talked about, early on, Mr. Harris Dawson talked about the process and how the committee process should go through these strategies. What we would suggest is, in terms of process, that the committee go through the report section by section, that we look at the strategies and determine whether there are any consent items that could be taken up. Some of the consent items, we can make recommendations to you. These consent items may have been some ideas that the council has already instructed staff to report on, or they may have no fiscal impact. So we would suggest that we deal with those, and then with regard to the items that are special in each section, that the committee have a further discussion on each of those items to make amendments, make changes, make additions. Then we deal with all of the strategies, and then subsequent to that, we can discuss additional strategies that this committee may want to add to the discussion. And then there's another section that we talk about the more immediate needs. There are some that are listed on page 207 of the report, which deal with specific line items that the committee may wish to consider in the short, immediate term. And to the extent that as the committee goes through this process, as we go through these strategies, to the extent that the committee can indicate relative priorities to us as well as the powers that be, what we hope is that it would be able to inform the upcoming budget process for 2016-17, which is currently in process in the mayor's office. And to the extent that we can get many of these ideas funded in the budget, that would be extremely helpful in moving forward with the implementation plan. So we also note that there is one particular strategy, Strategy 10E, which actually instructs our two offices to report on all of the costs and estimates and timeline implementation of the comprehensive strategy that the council would be approving. So we expect that today would be focused largely on the different strategies. Next meeting, we expect that there will be further discussions on anything that might come up today with regard to additional information or additional requests. If there are additional requests for new strategies, we can bring those back to you at the next meeting.
Thank you all so much. I would ask that the leader of LASA join you, Peter Lynn, for brief comments before public comment. Certainly. Peter, before we go, we have a question from...
First of all, thank you to all of you for the work that you've done on this. This is a really impressive document. Thank you to you and your staff. It's shown hard work and leadership and incredible vision, and I think everybody is very, very grateful for what you've done. I'll get into this a little bit more in section 4, but this is sort of both a semantic and a significant question based on Miguel's introduction. You talked about the importance of the coordinated entry system. And basically what I want to know is if you are talking about that specifically regarding the Home for Good coordinated entry system model, or if you're talking about coordinated entry systems in general. And the reason I ask is that, as the report notes, there are 3 different coordinated entry systems. There's CES, designed by Home for Good, which focuses on chronically homeless single adults. There is the Homeless Families Solutions System, and then there's the pilot program for transition-aged youth. And I just want to make sure that when we're saying coordinated entry system, because all 3 of those systems will one day be integrated, that we're talking about supporting and investing in all 3, and that we're not putting aside or leaving out in the cold our youth and our families and only focusing on chronically homeless adults.
I could respond to that now. I think we're talking about it in what it can and should be, which is a system that applies to the entire homeless population. And in our report, we do spend some time talking about the challenges of the current system today, and the fact that it hasn't been centralized. And so the way we're framing it is really about the potential, but sort of the underlying principles in the three systems you talk about still are the same.
As I said, it was a semantic distinction,
Yes.
but a significant one, so thank you for clarifying.
The most inclusive definition is what we're talking about.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Peter Lynn, the Executive Director for LASA. I'd like to express our LASA's strong support for the broad-based collaborative process that was undertaken to achieve these joint strategies between the city and the county, and also for the incredibly deep and rich collaborative partnership between city and county groups as they worked on these strategies. I was particularly encouraged by the open recognition of the resources needed to address the region's homelessness challenge, and by the central focus on housing as the key resource and the depth of supportive services that are needed, but as well as the strengthening the core systems, especially the coordinated entry system. And by that, I do recognize that that's the broadest term, and we need to integrate all populations into a single system, which obviously presents to different populations differently, but has and meets their needs differently, but is an integrated system. The collaboration between the City of Los Angeles and the county with the other 88 cities in the county is vital to our success, and it is also vital to demonstrating to our federal and state partners the depth of our commitment to ending homelessness. And I think that that's a really key point from the perspective of other parties who are watching us closely. LASA was heavily engaged in the process of formulating these strategies and engaged in the discussions. We're strongly supportive of the comprehensive nature of the resulting work. The strategies articulate a pretty clear central role for LASA in the expansion of these systems and programs to address homelessness, and LASA is ready to take that role on. It's also clear that the city and the county will need to work together with our federal, state, and private sector partners to develop new sustainable funding sources for these needs. But I really want to emphasize it's important that we remember that addressing homelessness actually saves money, directly and indirectly. Homelessness is more expensive than housing our homeless neighbors. I don't want to go into specifics at this point unless there are specifics you'd like me to address, but I would like to close with an invitation to the community and to the City Council with regard to the homeless count. We are conducting the annual homeless count, the first annual as opposed to biennial homeless count that will take place in 2 weeks, January 26, 27, 28. Please encourage your constituents to sign up to count. The website is theycountwillyou.org. Please encourage folks to the best of your ability to turn out for the count.
Thank you all so much. Members, are there any overviewing questions before we go to public comment? Hearing none, we'll thank you all and ask you to hang around for the deep dive that we'll do later in the meeting. We've got a couple dozen cards for speakers on item 1. We are going to have a 1 minute speaking time. We'll ask folks to stick to that as much as they can. But we really want to hear from you, especially if you have specific feedback on the report. So we'll begin public comment. We're joined by a guest today, State Senator Kevin Murray. We'll call him up first for public comment.
Thank you very much, members and council. I am Kevin Murray. I'm the president and CEO of the Weingart Center. We run a homeless services center on 6th and San Pedro. It's an 11-story building. We house and feed and serve roughly 500 people a night, and 15,000 or so come through during the year. I want to echo the sentiments commending the CAO and the CLA for doing this report. I think it's comprehensive, and if I can echo Peter Lynn's comments, the buzzword that you see here is collaboration, which is going to be the key to solving any of this. Also, want to commend Mr. Lynn's leadership at LASA, and I think LASA going forward is going to be the integral linchpin to make any of these strategies work. I have a couple of different comments. One is that collaboration is going to be important. Another thing that I also appreciated in the document was the idea of the recognition that there are different types of homeless people, and people got to homelessness in different ways, and there are different solutions to addressing them. And we're not all going student body left or student body right, to use a cliche. And the more we recognize that, the better. I do have a couple of very specific comments, which unfortunately maybe are not strategy related, but maybe they are in terms of how you analyze them. I would just ask for some clarification in section 7.5-1 on the relative costs of the different types of housing. What's listed here is $18,250 for shelters. Right now, LASA does shelter work at $25 a night. At least those are the contracts that I'm aware of, which calculates to a little over $9,000. There may be costs that are included in there that are not necessarily delineated, so there may be a solution to those. Same thing with transitional housing, which is listed here at $29,200 a night, which translates to $80 a night. From our experience, the going rate is about $45 a night, depending on who your funding source is. And the other thing that should be clarified so that this committee can make decisions based upon complete information is not to make an apples to orange comparison. The shelter includes 2 meals, sometimes 3 if it's 24-hour shelter. Transitional includes not only food and meals, but also access to workforce development and training classes and clinical and all sorts of services. Permanent supportive housing also has a service component. That service component in most cost delineations, I'm not sure about this one, but in most cost delineations, includes the cost of the social worker and case management, but not necessarily the cost of the eventual services. And the only other points that I would like to suggest that the committee expand into is something more comprehensive on workforce development and jobs, which goes to the initial concept that I want the committee to look at is whether or not our goal is just to put people in a house or to get them to be self-sustaining members of society where they are not necessarily subsidized any further. And that's a policy decision for this council to make, but I think it's a very important one. And lastly, I've been buzzed, so lastly, I think the council, in spite of the conversations that I've had, should reconsider the idea of declaring an emergency. Yes, we're not necessarily going to get federal money. Yes, we're not necessarily going to get state money. But I do think there is an important psychic reward for having this council, this city government, and this city recognize that this is an emergency situation. And secondly, on a more practical level, to the extent that you are going to pursue, which I very much hope you do, some of the zoning changes and regulations and planning changes that are in the document as potential strategies, that having an emergency declaration will be a significant legal underpinning for those decisions, particularly given that there's a number of different ballot measures and discussions about limiting that kind of zoning help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have Barry Goldad and Sophie Morissette and Brian Barajas to start.
Hi, I'm Barry Goldad. I am the Associate Director of Community Education and Outreach at Good Shepherd Shelter. We are a domestic violence organization. And I want to say I read the report, and I was incredibly disappointed and really surprised that I only saw domestic violence mentioned in there twice. In the 217 pages, it was only mentioned twice, and it was a component of a bunch of other areas. Domestic violence accounts for 21% of homelessness in Los Angeles. So for it to only be mentioned twice in this entire report was it was terrifying. It was really, really scary. And about 50% of all women are victims of domestic violence. And one of the things that I think is really important is I know that the city is going towards more of a rapid rehousing model for homelessness, but we know that this is not a model that's going to be effective for serving victims of domestic violence. They need transitional shelters. They need somewhere where they can go, where they can get the time to heal and to cope and to be rehabilitated so they're able to heal from this PTSD of being abused for years and years and years and years and possibly decades, and help their families. And transitional housing beds have already been lost since LAHSA announced that they're going to be cutting so much funding for transitional housing. And one of the things I think is really key to point out is the mayor has emphasized the increased investment in domestic violence. One of the things he did is he launched the rollout of the DART program to every single one of the LAPD departments. I'm running one of the DART divisions, one of the DART programs at one of the local LAPD office divisions, and I can tell you it's really hard for me when I'm talking to a woman. I was talking to one last night, and she was telling me, I want to leave. He's sleeping with a gun under his pillow. He's beating my son.
You're at time, so.
Sorry. And I have to tell her there's nowhere to go because all of the housing is getting cut. So I please just beg all of you to do research, look at everything that's out there. It's been in the surveys you've put together. If you connect the dots, you can see that this comprehensive strategy does not fully address the need for domestic violence victims.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a big topic, so we're trying to be lenient on time, but help us out. Thanks.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Anne-Sophie Morissette. I'm here today on behalf of the Downtown Women's Center. And we are really appreciative that this has been such a lengthy and coordinated and comprehensive process. And we are also appreciative that the plan looks at immediate action and also proposes some of the longer-term solutions we've discussed, in particular addressing the housing crisis, which we've mentioned to you time and again. We're very pleased to see that addressed. The challenge now, as we've heard already from the CLO's office, is the rubber hits the road in terms of funding. There is mention in both the city and the county plan of a dedicated funding source for homeless strategies. We'd love to see that motion potentially be proposed, and obviously for the plan to be fully funded. And lastly, I wouldn't be representing the women of Skid Row if I didn't say that the women really need to be called out as a subpopulation in need of dedicated services. We've seen the impact of calling out veteran homelessness. We've seen now dedicated recognition of the need of services for youth and transition-age youth, and women who are a quarter of the population, unaccompanied women, deserve very much the same. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have last call in the next 90 seconds, last call for public comment cards. So if folks have public comment cards, deputies will take them in the next 90 seconds, and then we'll close receipt. Mr. Barajas.
Okay. Well, I think one of the top-down strategies that people might want to consider, if you want to really deal with the crisis, you have to deal with the fact that you lost your country. That's a fact. In other words, and this is not including the people who are homeless. I'm not going to blame them for being homeless. That's ridiculous. But I'm telling the able bodies who have lost the capacity to lead this country out of chaos. I think I've been doing some work on that. I've been trying to promote here and trying to eradicate poverty, which includes funding for your programs. Not just housing, but also remobilizing, like FDR approach would have done, your citizens to become the citizens that they were meant to become. But either we do that or we will die.
Thank you. We want to mobilize everyone for the homelessness count, so we appreciate the call. Molly Lowry, Natalie Profant Camuro, Don Garza. Don Garza? Sorry, Mr. Garza. Yes.
Right. I'm Molly Lowry. And I too, really appreciate the tremendous effort that was made into making this plan, and that I found it quite amazing. A couple of things. I date back to the 70s when the homeless crisis was happening, the first homeless crisis. And I remember so much that all of us, we weren't getting paid to do this stuff. We were just setting up shelters and churches. The whole community was really involved. That's something we can do again. We can get our communities more engaged in this situation and not just depend on taxes and all of that stuff. And Highland Park, the Recycled Resources, is a good example of some people who've done that. All volunteer organization who got a shelter started a few weeks ago in a church. We can do that in other places because it's going to take us a long time to come up with the bucks to make this all work. Being somebody who does outreach engagement on the streets, all right, one of the most frustrating, intolerable things we have to do is reach out, do a survey on them, get them in the database, and have nothing to offer. And we need, if we're going to expand outreach, we need shelter and we need housing so that we have something to offer them besides tea and cookies.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalie Profont-Comoro. I'm the executive director of Essentia, which is located in Glendale. However, half the clients that we serve, and we serve about 1,200 people a year, half of them come from the city of Los Angeles. I'm very pleased that we're able to take over the operation of the Nela Winter Shelter in Highland Park. I want to thank Councilman Cedillo and Weezar for helping advocate for us to do that. I also have a long history, not as long as Molly's, but I started working in homeless services in 1987. From 1997 until 2007, I was the director of policy and programs for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority and staff to bring LA home. So I looked at this document with great interest, and I have to say kudos to turning it around so quickly. But here are some of the things that I worry about when I look at this broad list of strategies. The linchpin here is you. If we don't get land use under control and in the realm of serving the needs of the homeless and having more housing available in our communities, if you're not able to do that advocacy, it's not going to work. So one of the things about this strategy is it's very top-down. It's very much about the bureaucracy. It needs to give you more so that you can go out to the community and advocate for the work that we're doing. I also want to echo what Molly was saying about the community-based approach to homelessness. At Essentia, we bring in all kinds of volunteers from the community, people who have no other connection to homelessness. So I want to also encourage you to use language that's going to be helpful in engaging more people to this cause and support it, because when you want to go out and look for raising money, you're going to need their help. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
The first thing I see when I see this comprehensive strategy plan is $1.5 billion over 10 years. Unfortunately, $1.5 billion over 10 years is not linear, is linear thinking. It's old government thinking. It's not exponential thinking. It seems as if for some reason government is stuck in the dark ages when the economy continues to be an exponential economy. People are going to continue to become homeless exponentially overnight. People are going to become billionaires overnight. That's the first thing I see. The other thing I see is people dying on the streets with the recent rain. My neighbor Barbara, on the sidewalk, passed away in the rain. I can't stand this anymore. I've been doing this for 15 years. And I asked, she's here, the executive director of Downtown Women's Center, where were you? Scouring in the rain at night, looking for the people exposed. Where were you? Where are you? You say you're there, but you're not there. You're in your offices. You're in your buildings. You want more buildings. You want more money for more buildings. But it's incumbent upon those of us that lived on the streets at one time, that know the people there, to be out there. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I wasn't there in time. I had tarps. I had tents. I understand that there are loopholes. Yes, one of the loopholes was that she would have been unconscious and she wouldn't have been able to refuse help at that time. But I'm sick now. I'm weak now. I'm getting weaker. If it rains, I get bronchitis. I want help. I want this to stop. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. They're here. The majority of the people in here are service agencies, and they're going to keep telling you that they are the best approach. Of course they're going to tell you they're the best approach because they want that money to put in their nonprofit. What about the people?
Let's wrap
What about
up.
the people on the sidewalk? What about us, those that are stuck in the middle, that depend on you to vet these people to see that they're using the money correctly and not leaving people on the sidewalk to die and show you pictures of tents and tarps that they were there, but they weren't there. They weren't there. I have to go with my friends when it rains again with tents and tarps. I'm going to have a command post in Skid Row, and I'm going to be out in the rain. I don't care if I get sick or die. I'm going to look for the people that are exposed. I have to do it, and I have to do it on my own. Community approach, she understands that.
Thank you,
We need
Mr.
your help,
Garza.
and we need you to get, if you're going to give them this money, you need to come to those of us that receive these services to let you know what they're really doing. And I'm going to ask them, where were you when Barbara passed away? Where were you?
Thank you. We have Stephanie Klasky Gamer, LA Can Pete White, from LA Can Craig Roberts, and from LA Can General Dogon.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Klasky Gamer with LA Family Housing, one of our city's largest homeless service providers, as well as a developer of permanently affordable rental housing and permanent supportive housing. Our agency is the lead for the coordinated entry system, both for individuals and families in SPA 2, which incorporates the entire San Fernando Valley. And we appreciate those council members that have been able to go out and do visits around the city to see how unique each region is in its delivery of services. Outreach looks different, shelter looks different, permanent supportive housing looks different, and we appreciate that this plan is supporting and infusing capital in the coordinated entry systems and continuing the efforts that have been started and working well. What I would just ask is that we stay committed to what you laid out in a plan here. Put a dollar amount to it and truly dedicate a source of funding for the ultimate strategy that needs to be everyone's goal, which is the development of new permanent housing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. General Dogon, Skid Row resident. It is absolutely amazing and unacceptable that nowhere in the 223-page report is the word decriminalization of homeless mentioned. You all should be aware that the county plan explicitly proposes a strategy that calls for a policy that calls on law enforcement to stop the criminalization and identify means of engagement other than citation and arrest. So now we have the County of LA joining the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, the United Nations, and states like Connecticut, Illinois, Rhode Island, as well as numerous of organizations and homeless residents across the country, all calling to end the criminalization of law enforcement. The city needs to follow the county's example and include a policy that stops the enforcement like 4118D and 5611. As we speak right now and talk to create a plan, LAPD is in Skid Row right now citing and arresting people for things like sleeping, sitting, and sheltering themselves from El Nino. What we need is not handcuffs, but house keys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Craig Roberts, resident of Skid Row, proud member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. I think we can all agree that we need permanent solutions, and that those permanent solutions to the housing crisis, to the homeless crisis, is housing, permanent housing. But until we start building new homes and housing people, we must suspend enforcement of laws that only worsen the homelessness crisis. I live on 5th Street on the Nickel. And every day, almost every day, I see LAPD harassing the homeless, smashing and trashing their tents and belongings, effectively stealing from the people with the least. Continuing to spend up to $87 million a year just citing and arresting homeless people is not only an immoral waste of money, but it also doesn't work. We should be repurposing that money to spend on building permanent housing. One last reminder. Again, there are people dying out there. Thank you.
The public comment card period is closed, so if you haven't gotten your card in, it's too late. Welcome, Mr. Pete White.
Thank you. So, just a reminder, El Nino is our Hurricane Katrina, and are you going to repair the levees? As we know, well before the water receded in the Ninth Ward, Katrina laid bare the evidence of long-entrenched poverty, structural racism so long-standing that pathways to opportunities were non-existent, and that decades-old political rhetoric was nothing less than a death sentence. In the wake of El Nino, we face the same reality, the same shame, and as we already know, the death of many. We have failed and continue to fail before the temperature dropped and hypothermia set in. Rest in peace, Barbara. Well before we declared a meaningless state of emergency and an end to costly criminalization, only to continue our daily raids and locking up 120,000 homeless people per year, as this report states. We have failed when our mayor releases a report, calls it a plan, and offers a smorgasbord of options, turning it into a political game of pin the tail on the solution. We have failed when we continue to lie to ourselves when the real-time investment into criminalization continues and emergency responses to housing is represented in amorphous terms. We're not talking about master lease programs. We're not talking about preventing gentrification. We're not talking about making sure people stay secure today. We're not talking about making sure Jordan Downs and other public housing developments stay public. We have failed when we favor the path of procedurally kicking the can down the road instead of exhibiting leadership that makes hard decisions and utilizes and creates all options. I ask you, El Nino is our Hurricane Katrina. Are you going to repair the levees?
Thank you.
The only way to stop homelessness is to change the way we do real estate. Because right now, the only ones that can afford a place are people that are working, people that have the means to do so. And unless we start the system the other way around, where everybody starts with a home, there's no way to stop homelessness and poverty. So let's find a way to provide a house for everyone first, and then let's work on solutions to owning a Lexus, okay? We need the basics, and the basics is a home for everyone. Change the damn rules of real estate so everybody can afford a place to live. Everybody's homeless. If you're renting an apartment, it's not your place. Renting is not the way to go. Providing a place for everyone is the way to go, and we can do that. When we need a stealth bomber, we build it. We don't care how much it costs.
Thank you. Mr. Sean Gregory, Louise Frenchie Mbella, Steve Diaz, Freddie Black. Come on up.
Good morning. So the CAO report points out that annually it is cheaper for permanent supportive housing than it is for shelters. Annually, it's $18,250 per person for shelter, and it's $15,000 for permanent supportive housing. So housing is the only answer to homelessness, and I think that's where we need to put most of our efforts. Shelters are important. Storage is important, but only if it's linking people to that permanent supportive housing. And also, the county's report has supported the idea of having legislation that supports the idea of decriminalizing homelessness. Now, I, with RAP and LA Can, we've been working on the Homeless Bill of Rights. We have this legislation, and we need y'all, the city, to put its power where its mouth is and support the decriminalization of homelessness. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Louise Mbala. I serve in Los Angeles and on Skid Row as a co-chair of the Downtown Women Action Coalition, community organizer with LA Can, and former secretary of the Downtown Women Action Coalition. I'd like to bring the topic of the street in between shelters. How are you going to tell a hungry man, why don't you get food? Miss Barbara Brown died from a cold weather in a rich nation, nobody to give her a blanket. I give you an example. If there are 5,000 shelters, there are probably 15 or 20,000 people on the streets. So it's not that simple to just walk up to a shelter. Shelter kicks you out after a certain amount of time. Why don't you tell LASA to create programs where there is 24-hour shelter for the women? You could start there and then make sure LASA implement the grievance procedure, because when a homeless person in a shelter file a grievance, sometimes the shelter staff retaliates. You need to take care of that. Please. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Freddie Black, the Director of Clinical Services and Programs from 1736 Family Crisis Center, and I'm here to express our agency's deep concern about the fact that the comprehensive homeless strategy is not comprehensive at all when it comes down to domestic violence victims. In fact, it completely fails to address the crisis of domestic violence victims are facing over the past few years, as we are seeing their options depleting. When we see a plan called the Comprehensive Homeless Strategy leave out a subsection of homeless citizens, we become alarmed. Domestic violence victims are homeless by the nature of the fact that they can't go home. Their homes are dangerous for themselves and their innocent children. However, their needs are complex and stretch beyond that of other homeless subsections must endure. The coordinated entry system, in its execution, failed to take important measures to include and protect domestic violence victims. In fact, monies that were used to serve and protect our clients were rolled into the system. However, were not replaced to continue to safely serve these victims. In 2016, city domestic violence shelter programs are losing over $500,000 in funding by LASA to be reallocated to fund other homeless services that quickly house the homeless. However, no one has stopped to think about what this is going to do to the needs of domestic violence victims who usually cannot be housed quickly due to their safety concerns. With that, our urgency recommends that the City Council ensure that the city's $1 million homeless initiative includes strategies to address and protect domestic violence victims who are homeless due to fleeing life-threatening circumstances. Our suggestions coincide with the DV task force that are to, 1, recognize traditional housing as a necessary and best practice for victims of domestic violence, 2, ensure equal and safe access to housing resources, 3, restore DVSO funding at a minimum to the fiscal year 10-11 level of $2.1 million, and finally, 4, to dedicate emergency funding to replace the reallocation loss from LASA and the loss of services our clients endured from the coordinated entry system redesign.
Thank you. If you have that in a suitable format, you can give it to us. If you do, it's okay. Come on, next.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I am with LA Can. We cannot be talking about homelessness without talking about the fact that we need to ID new funding sources for housing and end the criminalization of homelessness. The report itself states that LAPD is arresting 120,000 homeless people every year, and yet that there's additional requests for additional resources to be included. We talk about the need for identifying money. Well, the money's there. Take it away from Chief Beck, take it away from the police department, and take it away from every brown person, every black person that's going to jail. Make sure that that money is actually spent on housing that is much needed in our communities. We must stop enforcing quality of life crimes. We must stop using city resources to continue to exacerbate the problem and not create real solutions. The CAO said it best earlier when she said this is only a strategy, this is only a platform of strategies. The action needs to be taken by this committee and by the city council. We cannot continue to say that we have a plan and that a plan is in place when it's not. It's all about process and procedure. We must take action now. Black lives and brown lives matter.
Thank you. Ariana Alcaraz, Jojo Smith, Wesley Walker, Ruth from Shelter Partnership.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Ariana, and I'm a member of LA CAN. So what is missing in your comprehensive strategy report is a huge section which lays out how you are going to build more housing. It is things that we have been blowing up in your faces, things that people who have dealt with homelessness and poverty, these are solutions that they have come up with, that they have wanted you to take action on for many, many years. And still, that has not been a plan, that has not been a priority of this committee or of the council member, or of the council itself. You have to start divesting from criminalization and from policing. I find it interesting, like what Steve said, 120,000 arrests of homeless people, but there's only 25,000 homeless people, a little more than that. That means that a homeless person is subjected to being arrested like 5 times a year. And you want to know what they're being arrested for? They're not being arrested for drug use or for stealing. While we were all enjoying our Christmas vacation and while we were on holidays, the police were arresting grandmothers. They were arresting people for stolen shopping carts. And then when they would come out of jail after being in jail for a couple days, the police officers would only record a little wallet that belonged to them. They would come out back to the streets with no tent, their sleeping bags thrown away, their tarps thrown away. Rest in peace, Barbara Brown, because that is the kind of shit that leads to deaths in the streets. It's not people's individual choices and why they choose to stay in the streets. Those police officers have been doing this since the cold season started. They have been out on the streets arresting people for stuff like that, okay? And then they come out and they have nothing. They have nothing.
Thank you.
Jojo Smith of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. I'm an unhoused resident of Skid Row. You know, in September when we said we're a state of emergency and homelessness and we were going to stop criminalizing, it's not stopped. It's every day people are getting arrested, getting ticketed. This money that's being funded, going towards ticketing, can be funded toward housing. We need housing. We don't need criminalization. We need to stop giving over half of our budget to LAPD. You know, when we say that there's a crisis, the firemen lose their jobs, but LAPD keeps getting more and more funding. We got to stop funding the criminalization. House keys, not handcuffs. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wesley Walker. I'm from the Los Angeles Community Action Network. And let us be clear that a 223-page report is not a plan, but rather it's a menu of options for the city council. So it's still up to you to step up to acknowledge that the only thing that will end the crisis is building more permanent supported housing. We need new dedicated sources for local funding, and that could come from TFAR. Not to mention, that's just one. Yes, the county has a plan, and the state senate has looked into the issue as well. But we must step up and find new sources. You have over a dozen ideas proposed for this report, but you need to start immediately by reallocating the $87 million from the LAPD to arrest homeless people that have no money, and take that money and build permanent supported housing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruth Schwartz. I'm the director at Shelter Partnership for almost 31 years. I'm very happy to be here. This is a very exciting day for me. And I want to congratulate the CAO and the CLA and LASA for what they did and putting this together. I think it's very, we're going to have nits, but, it's very comprehensive and it's very progressive. It's the most exciting day since I was here in 2007 when you guys came out with the Permanent Supportive Housing Plan. So this is really momentous, what's being presented. And at that time, LAHD and HACLA stepped to the table and started to really develop housing. And I want to say to HACLA especially that they are the backbone of the homeless system. They are your backbone. And I wanted to finish and just say on the bond issue. We tried to do a bond issue in the late 80s. We came this close to having the 2/3 vote with no campaign for affordable housing. I think this is really plausible, and I hope you'll pursue it because that's the only way we're going to get the sufficient funds in this city. And lastly, to look, working with you on new revenue sources. Thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you. We have Becky Dennison of Venice Community Housing, Sharon Rapport from the Corporation for Supportive Housing, Geraldine Stapleton from California Now, Michael Lego from CHS.
Hello, my name is Becky Dennison with Venice Community Housing. I do have a new hat today, but not a new position. Venice Community Housing remains aligned with our Home for Good partners and our Homeless Bill of Rights partners in saying that the only fundamental change that will happen in this city is if we drastically increase the production of permanent supportive and affordable housing. That means you all dedicating both money and city-owned land, which is in the plan, to help spur the production of housing at a drastically increased level. And we have to stop the criminalization of homelessness immediately, and particularly in this weather. Folks have to have some property and some ways to protect themselves as they're forced to live on the sidewalks. And so while you pursue this plan, and if you want to get into every last detail, go to town, do not wait to do those two things. All of the other things in the plan will never work unless we dedicate serious resources, both land and funds, to permanent supportive housing and stop the criminalization. We need you to not say stop the criminalization, we need you to actualize it on our streets. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Rapport. I'm with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. We're a national nonprofit working to end homelessness. And I, too, appreciate the thought and collaboration with the county on this very comprehensive plan. We support the focus on housing and getting people connected to permanent housing. We see that as the solution to homelessness. We'd also like to see a greater emphasis on the need for affordable housing for people with extremely low incomes, both to allow rapid rehousing programs to work over the long term, as well as to prevent people from falling into homelessness. Toward that end, we would like to see a source of funding that would fully fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at $100 million with local sources of money. Thank you very much.
Geraldine Stapleton, President of California National Organization for Women. I also serve as the CD4 rep to the Domestic Violence Task Force for the city. In our meeting Monday, it was brought to our attention that many of our people had already testified before this committee, and to find that domestic violence had only been mentioned twice was extremely disappointing. So I would really like to reiterate that we would like you to recognize traditional housing as a necessary and best practice for victims of domestic violence, ensure equal and safe access to housing resources for victims of domestic violence through a countywide coordinated entry system, restore the DBSO funding at a minimum to $2.9 million, and also dedicate emergency funding to replace the $167,000 in reallocated funding. On a personal note, having been in this situation myself, fleeing my abuser from a domestic violence situation, finding myself homeless, I know personally the need for this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Hi, I'm Mike Legal with CSH and Path Ventures. It seems like the only way they can really make a dent in this homeless situation is either affordable housing or permanent supportive housing, which I'm in, Path Ventures. And money's out there now, which is great, and programs like Path Ventures really make a difference because it's not a temporary thing, it's permanent supportive housing. I thought of another solution, one-word solution, Powerball. I mean, imagine what we could do with that much money. I just read something about $2.6 billion were raised or allocated, whatever, toward affordable housing in the U.S. cities. You just Google 2.6 billion. I don't understand all that, but we don't need that much for some of the things we're doing here. But permanent supportive housing, I've been in it for 6 years now, and it has enabled me to get on with my life and be productive in a lot of ways. So I really, really encourage permanent supportive housing. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a good note to temporarily close our public comment section. I'm going to defer to my co-chair, Councilmember Weezar, to lead the discussion among the members about the various parts. And we will come back. Yes, Ms. Sarnoff, we have about 14 cards left, of which yours is one. I've seen it with my own eyes. So it's there. So we're going to come back to it after we have had the discussion amongst the members and staff about the various sections of the plan. If you spoke already, you were good too, so we got you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess what we would ask that we do at this time is to go through, can we ask the CAO and CLA to come up to the table, please? And if we go through each of the report section by section and raise any issues that we would like to see in each one of those sections, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for us to go in depth about them at this point, but just raise questions at this time and see what we could get back at the next meeting. On the cover memo, if there's any questions or comments on that, anybody would like to raise anything on that? Yes, Mr. Bonin.
I'd just like the committee, whether it's at this meeting or the next, depending on the time sensitivity, that we recommend to the council that they transfer the $2.1 million in the UB for El Nino related homeless expenses.
Okay, if we would want to do that, Mr. CAO and CLA, how would we, can it be an action through this committee, or what would we need to do?
Yes, it could be an action of this committee. Some of these strategies might require some other action by the other policy committees, but in this particular instance, the monies have already been designated for homeless efforts, and so therefore it may not require like referral to the Budget and Finance Committee, for example. And I believe this item did come up during the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on the financial status report. It was inadvertently not included in the action, but there was discussion about utilizing this $2.1 million for El Nino efforts. There is one thing of note that the committee, that we just discovered earlier today, that is, there was some discussion of providing some funding to address storage. And there currently isn't any funding other than the $100,000 that council allocated to LASA to begin looking at different sites. So the $2.1 million is the only amount that is available. If it is all used for El Nino, then we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do about storage if it's funded in the current year.
Well, I'd contend that the El Nino expenses could include the storage because stuff's going to get wet.
Then we can expand that definition, perhaps.
Yeah. Do we need, given that this item won't be moving out of committee for a few more weeks because we're going to have a second hearing and the El Nino stuff is time sensitive, how do you recommend that the committee move forward on that recommendation so council can act?
Yeah, this particular item you could move forward to council. One of the things that's talked about on the cover page is actually authorizing the new homeless strategy committee to deal with the allocation of the funds. But since that committee will not have been formed yet, if council wants to designate someone, whether it be CAO, CLA, mayor's office, or jointly, collaboratively, to authorize them to expend the funds, since it may be of an emergency nature that we have to have quick access to these funds, that the committee could direct or direct those offices to administer those funds so that the funds can get out quickly. So you can send that action now to council for consideration and basically designating the three offices or whomever you designate to be able to expend and administer those funds.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move that we do what she indicated.
That'll be a without any objection, be the action of this committee on this item today. Unless there's any other actions, we'll hold that until we go through the report, but that'll be approved action from the committee. Okay, so moving on to section 2 on the demographics. This section does not have any recommendation, but does anyone have any questions or comments at this time on the demographics? No. Okay. Section 3. Yes, Mr. Curran Price.
First of all, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank you and Chairman Dawson for your leadership on this and for the work of my colleagues, the committee. Great job, I think, by CAO, CLA, and LASA in helping to organize our options, and so we just appreciate that legwork. Under 3B, under Encampment Protocols, I'm just curious, should we also include some protocol for encampment emergencies? For example, when there's a fire. I had a situation on Broadway Place. We've seen them periodically. A fire occurs, and the trash just sort of sits there for 2 or 3 weeks and not removed. And so I think we should think about some kind of expedited engagement protocol to address emergency encampment cleanup situations. If it exists somewhere, good. Otherwise, I would just encourage that to be added. A sentence someplace.
Okay, if we could add that somehow.
Absolutely, that could be added to
include that in the other strategies.
And on 3C, I may continue?
Yes, Mr. Price.
On 3C, in the case of the SMART teams, where do the assessed individuals go to get stabilized? Are they typically hospitalized? Could we potentially get severely mentally ill individuals off the streets sooner? And so I wonder, again, if some amendment to determine available beds, identifying beds for mentally ill, or just how we address those conditions.
Well, LAPD is already expanding the SMART program. I had a preliminary meeting with the fire chief to try to do the same, as well as find other ways in which the fire department could be much more responsive to the needs of the homeless people, working with the various hospital systems, creating, as we state here, sobering units, a variety of other areas. So you could expand the specific in relation to LAFD to include exploration of connecting them to the SMART program as well, and that could something that could be developed in the context of the fiscal year 16-17.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have in that section.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo.
On the question of the SMART teams, which I think is smart, but I'm interested in the composition, right? So we have LAPD and a mental health worker, correct? Yes. Right. So the question is, how do we change the composition? What would you recommend, or how do we move forward so that LAPD's participation is at the most minimal and at the kind of last resort? So my vision is that the SMART teams will be made up of healthcare professionals, people who worked, nurses, mental health professionals, the type of support workers who are ancillary in a healthcare system would be engaged in that. Perhaps paramedics, firefighters, and that only in the last resort and only in the most appropriate circumstance then would we tax our LAPD to be engaged or involved in this. It seems that both from a cost perspective, what it costs us to have one officer versus what it costs when you look at the salaries of a nurse versus a member of our department, of our police department, and from a kind of what's the appropriate right person doing the right job in the right place, that we would want to put out in the field more SMART teams that are more focused around the healthcare and the mental health care delivery and those assessments as opposed to the presence of the LAPD. That seems to be we would want that to be a rare circumstance rather than the protocol. Right now, it's designed as the protocol, and I think that's just not functional in terms of what the goals and objectives are of the SMART team. And two, it's not the right cost. I mean, I think we get more bang for the buck if we were utilizing RNs, PHNs, LVNs, the whole range of healthcare professionals, mental health experts, et cetera, that probably on a dollar for dollar cost we'd get more bang out of the buck with those professionals, and that it's the right person for the right job at the right place.
Mr. Cedillo, there are three ways that could potentially occur. Already the county is starting to expand their capacity of healthcare providers on the street, locating services in Skid Row and other areas of large concentrations. And so a big part of their recommendations is to expand that program and tying it to mental health providers as appropriate. The second, as I indicated to Mr. Price, the fire department is currently exploring how to use paramedics and tying them to a nurse practitioner program, as well as possibly even tying the mental health services on the street. And the third, of course, is through the expansion of the coordinated entry system, because the coordinated entry system is a person connecting to another person. Oftentimes that person may need support, specifically if there are mental health issues involved. And so expanding the capacity through that is another way. So we could work on expanding the definition of this particular item to be inclusive of those three areas, or to go into more detail.
There is one additional aspect of the SMART team too. If I recall correctly, the SMART team actually originated as part of our requirements under the consent decree. And as part of that response to that, remember, these are situations in which LAPD has already been called out to. So there is already an issue or of a law enforcement nature, and if they determine that mental health may be an issue, then that's when there is a requirement to ask for these SMART teams to be deployed. So it's not, LAPD may need to be a part of it, only because the initial call did come as a result of a law enforcement type situation.
Right. No, I get that, and I get that it stems from or its history comes from the decree. But what we know is happening, in fact, is that, of course, it's a 911 call because our whole city is conditioned around that, and that's fine. But that's not the appropriate response, right? The question is, how do you turn the 911 call for Skid Row or other areas anywhere in the city so that the call is really a call for someone who wants to send out what would be a new SMART team with a different composition? How do we turn that into that, right? I know that it came from the decree, but it's kind of backwards now. What we really want is the professional mental health people and health people first, and then in those circumstances where they feel it's appropriate to call the LAPD, let them make that judgment to call them out, because all of us, all the citizenry of the city is going to say, oh, well, I got to call 911. But that's not the decision that we want somebody in the field making. The assessment there should be done by the healthcare professional and the new composed SMART team.
So when we brought in the strategy to include that, there's also some discussion in that in strategy 4B. So when we get to that section.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to section 4, coordinated entry system. Mr. Bonin?
Yes, sort of following up on my comments to Mr. Santana at the beginning, this section speaks about both the coordinated entry system generally and also specifically, and most of the analysis of the problems with the coordinated entry system and the need for improvement and the policy recommendations indicating how to help support the coordinated entry system are focused on the United Way Home for Good coordinated entry system for the chronically homeless. I'd like to see staff for our next committee come back with some policy recommendations for how we can improve and strengthen the Homeless Family Solution System and the Pilot TAY program. The CES system, capital CES, has benefited really from the phenomenal work of the United Way and the Home for Good program. And I think the other two programs, which also serve very vulnerable populations, are probably going to need probably a little more help from us and from the county to get to the level they need to be to integrate completely. So I'd like to see some recommendations on how we can help foster that.
We could certainly expand this section to be inclusive of those two areas as well, both the family and the TAY.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Section number 5, governance. Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you. On number 5B on governance with regard to the Homelessness Strategy Committee, I wanted to make an instruction that the H&P chair or a designee be included in the committee along with the Homeless Services Coordinator once we get that established and have a person there.
My recommendation on that item is that we just confer with the City Attorney's Office, because most of the work of that coordinating committee will be to evaluate and adopt reports that ultimately come to your committee. So your committee would be voting on the work of the coordinating committee. That's the way the other similar committees that operate. We have one around information technology, for example, and whenever there's a major action that proceeds forward, the ITALC in this case reviews a report and then gets submitted to the Information Technology Committee for review. So just to make sure that there isn't sort of the awkwardness of having the chair vote twice on an item.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And then on with regard to the city's Homeless Strategy Committee, looking at the LASA JPA, to make an instruction that the CLA look at an amendment so that 2 appointments come from the City Council and the remainder staying with the Mayor of Los Angeles.
We can report back to you on that.
Okay. 5D, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes, you know what I'm interested in is hearing from you on the prospects of moving the LASA membership from these part-time quasi-governance entities to full-time, more both policy and operations, and the thought of them being full-time. And what triggers that for me is the virtues of our Public Works Commission. We have a commission that's full-time, it's paid full-time, and provides for the council members can do it to their district and someone who can be in charge of Public Works. You've got a lot of people, the leadership of this region, which is collaborating, at a level I don't think we've seen in a long time. But we need people who are just exclusively focused on this, permanent, full-time, that have only one task every day to get up, and that's to figure out how we eliminate homelessness. And so, just a thought on from you guys on what if we moved those positions from part-time positions. I always, I feel this about our LAUSD school board. I feel about our community college board. You're neither soup nor water on these positions when you're part-time, and I think we should. This matter requires that we have those types of operational people, and then we are able then to deploy them to be more effective in our efforts. So, just a thought for.
So we can include that as part of our report, but there may be some restrictions as this is a JPA, would require coordination with the county, and there may be other laws that may inhibit our ability to do some of these things. We can report back in the context of the other instruction.
And of course, I think nothing prevents the city's appointees to be, city staff that work exclusively on that. So we would require the support of the county if we anticipate that LASA would be basically the employer for those individuals, for those board members. I know that, up the street, in the past, supervisor staff have been members of the LASA Commission who work specifically on homeless issues. So essentially, they were full-time homeless people that worked on behalf of that supervisor. But that's certainly something we could look back to and make recommendations.
Mr. Price?
Thank you. I like in section E, I like the idea of the Public-Private Regional Homeless Advisory Council as a resource, a sounding board and a resource. Could these folks report to the Homeless Strategy Committee? And as this committee is comprised, perhaps even there's a place for the spa, each spa, to be on that committee. Again, I'm just trying to figure out how we get the broadest kind of input.
I recommend Peter Lynn come back, speak to this item because this is actually something that is to be responsive to certain federal requirements.
So the concept here is to include a broad representational swath of individuals who have institutional representation, who have sort of sector representation, but also have regional representation. Currently we have at LASA an advisory committee that's called the Coordinating Council, which is voted on by SPAs. They elect a representative to sit on that Coordinating Council, and they advise the Commission on certain policy matters with regard to the continuum of care, reallocation policies, and things like that. But the intent for this is to have a broad-based representational body that would include regional representatives. So I think that's a slice of it. There would also be sort of institutional seats and consumer seats and a variety of different kinds of representation.
Just want to make sure there's some grassroots involvement on that. So it sounds like you're suggesting that it would be.
That's right.
Through the spas.
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, next section number 6, facilities. Any questions or comments? Mr. Bonin?
Thanks. I actually had 3 items here on this one. First one is small and technical. Under 6C, the Lava May proposal for the mobile showers, I just wanted to recommend that we add LADWP to the list of collaborating agencies. I've been speaking for several months with Metro and LADOT and DWP, and all 3 agencies are on board to participate with this, and obviously the water hookups at the hydrants would come from DWP. The other 2 recommendations were I'd like to see CAO-CLA provide an additional policy recommendation regarding increasing public restrooms. In the narrative of the report, you talk about the pit stop program in Miami, but there's not a specific policy recommendation. I'd like to see one. And the final one is there's also in the narrative talk about the sobering centers that LAFD has been talking about. I know the county is very eager to see them as well, and I'd like to see if we can have a policy recommendation so there's actually something specific to follow up on. Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So you talked about the Safe Park programs in the report at some place, but for us, one of our thoughts and concerns is the question of, for the RVs, this septic tank disposal, and the thought of using our sanitation centers as facilities to work with them, and not only just to work with them for that actual function for those who are living in their RVs, but also to work with nonprofits where we could then utilize their visits to the facility as a place for us to engage them and coordinate services for them. So interested in getting a feedback on that. Also would be open to discussions about a pilot project in our district so that we can work with the Bureau of Sanitation, and we have a corridor of people living in their RVs. We covered an opportunity to develop a safe parking environment, but we also recognize that this is just a functional reality that has to take place, and we'd like to work with Bureau of Sanitation in making that happen.
We can certainly add those items to this, to 6B.
Thank you. Next, section 7 on housing. Let me start with the chair of the committee, Mr. Cedillo.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Let me begin by thanking both our CAO and CLA for their work. And Peter, I want to thank you in particular for your leadership and courage. Just a few weeks ago, we had a situation about whether or not we could open up a shelter. Our first new shelter in the Northeast, I can't tell you in how long. Business as usual, which is a tone, which is an attitude and disposition, gave us a conclusion that that shelter was not acceptable. It was not up to code. It didn't meet our standards. But this sense of urgency, your leadership, your courage, when we spoke, we were able to come to a conclusion that it was better for us to open up that site than not, and that it was better to have people inside than sleeping on a cold cement floor. And so I want to thank you for your leadership on that, and that has been an extraordinarily successful shelter. We're at the, we're filled up to the rim, and we're searching for more alternatives. You know that. But on the question of housing, we have this incredible sense of urgency about what we need to do today, and yet at the same time, we know that housing takes time to build. It's not just a question of the resources, but it's also a question of the fact that it takes time. And so I came into office, the president of our council was very generous and made me chair. In our office and our committee, we participated in a 1.5 year, 2-year dialogue with the people who actually build, with the business community, with the developer community, with the people who build. Because at the end of the day, we're having a discussion about affordable housing and homeless housing and wraparound services, et cetera. The reality is, unless we create an abundance of supply for workforce housing, for people coming out of college, for millennials, for seniors, for people who are empty nesters, an abundance of housing in this city, 100,000 units as fast as possible, we're not going to solve this problem. And when there's ever a debate between who's going to get the small converted garage, and is that person going to take a voucher, or is that person going to bring in 2 hipsters who can pay twice or 3 times the voucher level? It's going to be the person who can pay 3 times. And so we cannot, in terms of the market, be successful in these strategies if we only focus on the greatest need. We must have that focus on the greatest need, but we have to be strategic and pull back and understand that we've got to build 100,000 units of housing for everyone. That's how we get people off the streets. That's how we create density. That's how we eliminate and reduce traffic congestion. There's a tremendous benefit, but the greatest benefit is that's how we house people and make sure people are off the streets. And so the net result of that conversation was a housing conference which took place last August. And in that conference, 7 proposals came out of that, and you've delineated all of them, and we appreciate that. The micro units, the change on the TFAR, acknowledging and recognizing the granny units. There's a few others that can't just come right off the top of my head, but there were 6 or 7 of them. There's 7 to be exact. So we did that in August. We came out. It's called House LA. We're very excited about the reforms because the reforms come from the community of people who will build housing. And I know one of them was using city properties for that specific purpose of housing. Like 80 units that we would have built on the 3 blocks from my, 3 successive blocks from my district office in Highland Park. 80 units, 40 of them craftsman style, all affordable, all supportive services. 40 of them in a consistent with the historic nature of the community on a city parking lot, on 3 city parking lots successive without losing a city parking lot. We've been challenged in that area because somebody filed an I believe, what you call an abusive CEQA filed a claim that has left 80 people without a place to live. And so we've come back with these 7 reforms, and the conference was in August. We sit here in front of you in January. That is not a response for urgency or for an emergency. And so my question is, how do we move these? As the chair of the committee, we are scheduled to hear them next week, but I'm happy to waive them and move them from this committee, because this committee has both the chair of Plum, the chair of Housing, and this committee. I'm happy to move those matters so that we can move them and make them an ordinance and codify them and do the legal things that we must do so that we can begin the process of building the housing that has to take place. We're very fortunate today in that seldom has the community, the people in this community who have wealth, the philanthropists, but not just them, the working people, the middle class, the generosity of this city and the people who are committed to helping. If we don't give them ways to help, people will just go down and serve dinner and lunch at Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's nice, but that's not what we need people to do. What we need people to do is to figure out how we build housing. We have 7 proposals here. It's called House LA. How do we move this as fast as possible so we make the proposals for House LA a reality and a plan to House LA? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo what Mr. Cedillo said in complimenting the staff's work on this section in particular. One of the things I've been saying for a very long time is that we've created an unfortunate binary situation in Los Angeles where, for the most part, your options are either the sidewalks or permanent supportive housing. And there's not been nearly a sufficient supply of permanent supportive housing, so we've got tens of thousands of people unsheltered living on our sidewalks. And I appreciate that this section of the report sort of addressed that we need a continuum of options for folks off the sidewalk until we have that sufficient supply of permanent supportive housing. I think that's really, really very important. In this conversation, Mr. Cedillo and I talk about sort of different ends of this, just as a matter of emphasis. If this is if this were a surgical procedure, the conversation he just had is, from the procedure to post-op, and I tend to try to talk in this conversation about the pre-op into the procedure. And there were a number of things that were mentioned again in the narrative that I wanted to tease out through some additional policy recommendations. There's actually 8 of them, and I have them in writing for clerk, CLA, and CAO. But one of them is to request that we craft an instruction to LASA to create an annual goal for reducing the percentage and numbers of unsheltered homeless people, so that there's policies and outcomes that can be measured by our newly created governance bodies. We have one of the highest rates of unsheltered homelessness in the country, 70%. And what is our goal a year from now, 5 years from now? How much do we reasonably think we can be bringing that down? The second one is I'd like CAO and CLA to provide a policy recommendation pertaining to the needed expansion of shelter capacity, including location, funding, and staffing. We talk about the need to expand it in the short term and then retract as the housing comes online. But we need a policy recommendation, I think, to tell us how to proceed with that. The third is to ask for a policy recommendation, and this is a bit more dicey, about whether or not the city should be acting to fill some of the gaps this year and the next year that have been created by HUD's changing funding criteria and the de-emphasis on transitional housing. I know that the model is said not to pencil well, but there's a number of programs serving victims of domestic violence and others that are suffering short term, and should the city make a policy priority to help them in the short term. The fourth is something that we've talked about, and Mr. Harris Dawson and I have talked about a lot, is the need for shared housing as an option. And I'd like to see a policy recommendation regarding shared housing, whether or not we can incentivize that more, whether it can be built in more to short-term housing options, sort of parallel with bridge housing, if shared housing can be an option. The fifth is, there's a lot of talk, thankfully, I'm very grateful that there's mention in this report and in the county's reports about the flexible housing subsidy program that the county has created and the parallel program that LASA has created. And I'd just like a policy recommendation about how we, the city, or even philanthropists can buy into that so that we can get folks housed through that program. And the other one was asking for a policy recommendation regarding the use of master leasing programs as a way to facilitate landlords making units available for homeless housing. We talk in one of the policy recommendations about a pilot program over 2 years of ways to get to facilitate landlords taking folks, but master leasing has proved successful, and that might be something we want to look into specifically. The last two are just technical. Under 7A, which is regarding the shelter, converting shelters to bridge housing, it has a number of criteria there for refinements of how we do shelters, reducing the number of the barriers to our shelters and making them more hospitable. One that I think was just an oversight was missing was keeping the facilities open 24/7. I think that was understood, but it wasn't called out specifically. And the final one is under 7K, which refers to the development of a second dwelling units pilot program. It talks about perhaps requiring landlords to accept Section 8 vouchers. I just wanted to make sure that we're also talking about VASH vouchers and the flexible housing subsidy vouchers and stuff like that, and it's not just Section 8. There's a number of different vouchers that homeless people may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you so much. And also thank the Chair of the Housing Committee for his leadership on this among the most complicated issues in the city of Los Angeles. A couple policy recommendations that we like to put forward, some of them are consistent with what Mr. Bonin just put forward in Section 7A. We'd like to see some particular focus on mothers with children, particularly mothers with teenage boys. Feedback that we get in the community on the streets that this is one of the hardest categories and most difficult groups to find housing for, especially transitional housing. Also, with regard to the flexible housing subsidy pool, the master lease, some exploration of the idea of master leases for categories like domestic violence or mothers with children or so on and so forth. On 7K, we'd like HCID's report back to include the impacts of out-of-code units and how an amnesty program could include an incentive to rent to Section 8 or other voucher holders in exchange for fast-tracking their conversion to legit legal units. And we wanted to ask LASA to strike the last recommendation for doubling up on the transitional age youth units. Just on-the-ground experience said that would create more difficulties. And then that concludes our housing recommendations.
Mr. Cedillo.
Thank you. So I have some specifics for you in terms of helping us move and streamline. Let's start with 7D and help us identify the city-owned property that could be used for the development of affordable housing and housing for the homeless. That's under House LA, Council File 15-1007, and we would like you to work with the mayor's operations innovative team to streamline that report. It's one. 7K. What is it? 7K? 7F. 7 7K is a HCID report on the creation of by right guidelines for single and multifamily residential zoning. That's under Council File 140057 S1. And the goal is to make it easier to build secondary dwelling units for homeless population and also bring illegal units, bring them into code and bring them online. So we ask for your support to streamline this House LA report with planning. 7L is planning with HCID to evaluate opportunities and recommend changes or special exemptions for residential zoning codes and parking requirements to allow for micro units. That is huge for us. For homeless housing, that is Council File 141004. Micro units may be a new way to look at the question of density. And we ask for you to streamline this report with the House LA report coming from planning, including any comments from this discussion. And then finally, 7M is the city planning report on potential amendments such as raising the threshold to the site plan review ordinance to reduce development timelines for affordable housing units dedicated to homeless individuals. That's under House LA Council File 141003. And so we are asking planning to amend the new site plan review ordinance, increasing the threshold from 50 residential units and establishing an administrative zoning clearance process for projects below the threshold as a strategy to increase the city's affordable housing production and again help us streamline that Housing LA report coming from planning. Is that it? Oh, and then finally, where the heck is that one? 7F is planning to establish a housing unit and conduct a linkage fee nexus study to support affordable housing and homeless housing. This brings we're asking for you to identify the necessary funds for the Department of the City Planning to execute a contract for the development of a new affordable housing benefit fee study and to effectuate the transfer of the funds to the Department of City Planning in the next financial status report. In addition, report back on position authorities for the new housing unit. Is Rush here? That's it. Any questions? Clear as mud? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Go to Section 8, Land Use. Questions or comments on land use? No? Yes, Mr. Aristotle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On Section 8A, ask planning to include a prioritization of transit-oriented developments as it connects to affordable housing.
Mr. Cedillo?
Yes, on HC, House LA under Council File 15-1002 to instruct the Department of City Planning to prepare and present a report on recommendations on vehicle parking regulatory reform with an analysis of strategies to reduce and or eliminate parking requirements based on selected criteria, including but not limited to certain types of development, specific zones, and proximity to transit. We'd like to streamline that report coming from planning.
Okay. Section 9, additional strategies. Anything that members would like to comment on or propose for this section?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On 9B, would ask the departments to also include a focus on job training and outreach. And 9D is in door. Instruct the United Way funding collaborative be included in development of this strategy.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else? Next section, budget, section 10. Anything else? Yeah, we could get in more detail on budget next time. Okay. All right. So, Mr. Harris Dawson, do you have anything else?
Yes. We have a series of 7 or 5 additional strategies we'd like to be added to the comprehensive report. The first one being housing and job training for the reentry population. Again, a big category of folks who are homeless are folks coming home from prison. The expectation is that they go live with family or friends. A lot of times, because of our housing situation in Los Angeles, there just simply is no room with family and friends. And so we'd like HSID and LASA to report on providing specific housing for individuals just after their release. That could be conditional housing or have a specific set of conditions placed on it. But we think that there has to be a category of housing for this population in particular, and at the same time ask EWDD to devise a specific strategy for job training for the population in said housing. And then funding for domestic violence shelters. We heard in public comment the tricky time period just after a domestic violence victim leaves the house. The time between then and the time that they can live on their own. Perhaps we don't call it a shelter, but we need some type of housing to deal with that gap. And so we'd ask that we come up with specific recommendations to deal with that problem. The shared housing concept, that's one that we've been raising since we got here. I think it's particularly important in districts like CD8 and others that have a more suburban landscape. We want to get again, assessment of the feasibility of a shared housing policy that is actually codified. And then obviously we support supporting more outreach workers, particularly ones that will work with the CES system, and ensure that our major agencies that come in contact with homeless people can in fact have access to outreach workers so that they can take on that work. And so we'd like to get an idea for what additional funds would be required to do that, both to bring those outreach workers on and to integrate them with the various departments, whether it's library or fire or so on and so forth. And then social impact, taking a look at social impacting financing. Communities in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Denver, Santa Clara County are implementing social impact or pay for success strategies as a means of bringing private resources to the table. And so social innovation bonds are at the outer edge of daring social policies, and so we want to take as hard a look at that as we can, because perhaps Los Angeles can be a leader in that.
Well, thank you very much. This will continue to say. Cedillo, do you have something else? No? Okay. We will continue this item and hear it again at our next meeting, which is January 27th at 3 p.m. in this same room. Mr. Harris Dawson, I'll turn it back to you now.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the staff, Miguel and Sharon and Peter. Amazing work. We have more public comment cards. Again, you're limited to 1 minute, so we're going to call you up as they are gathering their things to continue to hear from the public. John Seeley for Americans for Democratic Action, Zandre Johnson from CSH, and Juan Acala. I told you I would call on you, Juan.
Thank you. I will divide my whole 60 seconds between my two hats. On behalf of Americans for Democratic Action, I would like to say that our policy is very supportive of comments already made on the vital importance of decriminalization of homelessness and the need for permanent supportive housing. Now, As an individual and an observer of the homeless scene, who is also a journalist writing about it, I'd like to say that, the big picture is composed of a lot of little pictures. And while there's a lot of talk about coordinated entry system, coordinated response, I would have to point out what I've noticed in the lack of coordination in the city's response. For example, there's a good deal of expansion of winter shelters going on, which is all very well, and some of them have been filled, some of them have not been. Part of the reason they have not been is because people cannot come with their belongings, because naturally there's a limit to how much space these can be accommodated. But on the other hand, where is the storage that would permit people to put their things away and then go to the shelters?
Thank you.
More response is needed, more coordination is needed right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Andre Johnson, and I want to thank the city and county for collaborating together to make this happen in the future. I am formerly lived as far as homeless for 2 decades, and it was for supportive housing that caused me to be the person that I am today. I have a place to call home now. It's for good, and it's affordable. I'm also a Speak Up advocate for a Corporation for Supportive Housing. So my whole life has changed from being on the streets for so many years to the person that I am now, because I had that permanency. So I'm asking that, you look into that, as you have done and as you have shown you've done, because there's many of me out there. I'm not the only person that is doing this work, and I'm not the only person that is living a decent life now that we have the help that we possibly need to have a better life. But there's still many out there that don't have this type of life that I have, so I'm asking from my heart to make it happen for them as well.
Thank you so much.
I just have one very small question. Is remember when we bailed out the banks? Where did we find trillions of dollars? Trillions! To give to the people that are hoarding the housing, the banks. You know how many houses they take away from people every year? It's called repossession. I call it rip-off. We're ripping off society and financing institutions that are ripping off society. Why don't you end homelessness? Billions of dollars, Obama! What the hell is wrong with you? You're on your way out. But why did you finance the banks and did not end homelessness? It's very easy to end homelessness, but we made a huge business out of it.
Thank you. All right, Ruth Sarnoff, I told you. Joe Donlin, Timothy Park, Mellow Desire. Yes, Ms. Sarnoff.
Ruth Sarnoff. First of all, I would request that this committee tell the mayor to veto 5611. Number two, I think that this committee should support Senator Murray in his call for federal and state aid. I think that this committee should identify the empty publicly owned property. There's a lot of publicly owned property. The state too, Caltrans has property. Wells Fargo is one of the biggest slumlords in Southern California. You have a lot of city and county land. And call one.org and tell the president we don't need $1.3 trillion to build a new weapons system to deliver nuclear weapons. That is not what he was given the Nobel Peace Prize for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mellow Desire from the Kingdom Warriors Foundation. We have an initiative, solution-based initiative to help reduce homelessness, not only in Skid Row, but in South LA as well. In April 2013, we inquired with Weasel's office about property 225 East 5th Street, the Firehouse 23, that is utilized for filming. We asked since 2013 for Ms. Hernandez to provide in writing what the city is planning on doing with this last piece of property. We have a plan, outside investors, ready to build a state-of-the-art recording studio, a computer center, a job resource center to help train 120 youth. The young people are the ones that are ready, willing, and able to train them in how to remove and how to speak to individualized people on the streets rather than one cookie cutter program for one size to fit all. We need a location. And so in writing, we ask, what are you doing with Firehouse 23 so the community can know that we have a place to start this training to help reduce homelessness?
Thank you.
I am pastor and a missionary, Timothy Park, serving as homeless people literally on the street in the Los Angeles areas. I wanted to propose two things. Is that the California passed the bill for $2 billion to build more than 10,000 shelters and the buildings and the programs. But last May 20th of this year, I went to White House and delivered a message to the President Obama that the idea is that building hundreds of thousands of shelters for the homeless people is not really a fundamental solution for the homeless problems. We delivered that.
Thank you.
The homeless people, we wanted to build the homeless town out of the city and to give them a entire new opportunity.
Thank you.
So that's what I wanted to propose, and also I wanted to mobilize Korean community and the outside the resources to help and to participate these great visions. And if you can allow us, we'll do it for
We truly appreciate it, and you're way past your time. Thanks again. Zahira Mann, Jerry Newman, Chris Coe.
Hi, council members. My name is Chris Coe with Home for Good and the United Way, and it is my deep desire to not have this job in 5 to 10 years. I think what's remarkable about the plan is it gets better the more you read, and it's comprehensive in a couple ways. I think it's short-term and long-term, and it addresses the housing and homelessness crisis. And maybe I should raise my expectation of government reports, but I was certainly impressed by it. I also wanted to share with you some of what we're thinking as we're developing CES. And the first is it was meant for all populations. We changed our assessment to be something that would serve families, youth, and single adults. We've thought of the DV population with unique client identifiers. It is meant as a base that can be open source for all groups. And finally, it's meant to leverage everyone who wants to help. I live in a community that has no services, no housing. And I want to be able to enter someone, give an assessment, enter them in a system, and know they have the same shot at a voucher as someone else. And what's in the plan of regional coordination, CES navigation, housing, and changing the database helps us accomplish that. So help us, help our friends, and give more than a blanket and connect them to housing as well. Thank you.
Seeing none of the other speakers in the queue, Yvonne Autry, Mihe Rizdon, Jason Robeson, Kevin Key, and Mickey Jackson.
Thank you for an opportunity to speak. I go on the record asking or requesting more time. I'd also ask that you devote or use more of your money for the prevention of homelessness and not to the breeding and engineering of homeless people, poor people, disease, medicated people that are addicted to medications for, of course, greater revenue. I'd also like to ask that you use more money to devote towards cleansing and detoxification centers rather than just centers where they're given syringes and given methadone instead of heroin, but places where people can really detox and get the healing that they need to re-enter society. The reason that homelessness has not been alleviated is because you do not want to alleviate it. It's an easy disposal of people that you do not want to look at. I've said this many times, putting in the trash, so that you can justify experimenting, genetic experiments, and using mind control experiments, torture people, by and large black people, people of color. So in exposing this civil engineering, we ask that you prevent that and allocate more of your money to education to prevent people from being truant and homeless or participating in criminal activities that would lead them into either prisons or unproductive, dysfunctional activities.
Thank you.
For the greater revenue of the city.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Miha Rizdan. I'm with Corporation for Supportive Housing. I just ask that because it takes 2 to 3 years to actually develop affordable and supportive housing, even under expedited circumstances, that the City Council move quickly to ensure that strategies to increase the amount of local money available for permanent supportive housing creation are adopted in time for the 2016-2017 budget. The only way to significantly increase unit production and the actual availability of units for people to move into is for the city to increase the funding sooner than outlined in the current plan. It has to increase by no later than the 3rd year in order to actually see units in the ground constructed within the first half of the 10-year plan period. We also recommend that a table that actually breaks down how the $113 million in the Homeless Services Trust Fund is going to be allocated between the different uses be added to the report.
Thank you.
Hi, Jason Robinson with SHARE, and thank you, council members. I want to thank everybody here for their effort in really addressing the issue. And as we move forward, I want to make sure that we keep the bar high and don't move backward, because I think it's important that we keep the goal of housing everybody, because we can house everybody. I also want to say that one of the things the city can do as it's moved forward with its plan in expanding shelters is to look at the people in shelters who have income and immediately identify ways that they can use that income to support their own housing, because we shouldn't have people coming back to the shelters that have income. One of the ways to do that is shared housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That concludes public comment on item number 1. It concludes public comment on item number 1. What's your name? Oh, you're Mickey. Okay, come on up. Sorry.
That's okay. Hello. Hi, Gil. I'm with the Coalition to Preserve LA. We are putting an initiative on the ballot, the Neighborhood Integrity Initiative, to try to deal with the lack of a city plan that's caused mega developments. There's a lot of development going on in Los Angeles. Most of it's luxury housing. We have too much luxury housing. We have a 12% vacancy rate in our luxury housing. I wanted to talk about, we talk about housing. We need to define the housing we talk about. We need to say, what is affordable housing? A $1,200 single is not affordable housing. We need to be specific. It needs to be something like $600, $800, so that when you hear housing, you don't know whether people are talking about, oh, it's great, we're building more housing. And then you find out it's $3,500 one bedrooms. And as that I know of, wealthy people are not homeless and sleeping in their BMWs. So we need to be very clear about that.
Thank you. So that concludes. No? You guys got to step up now. Michael Key, all right.
Thank you all. For 2 years, more than 2 years, Barbara Brown slept outside on the street at 6 and Stanford. Very, very, very close to our office. And I saw a multitude of service providers and LAPD and the CES and the VS that come. And they would ask her, do you need help? Are you all right? Instead of providing her the help that she so desperately needed. And so they take her word for it when she say, I don't need help. I'm okay. And it was the people in the community that would provide her with the blankets, would provide her with $1 here and $1 there. And so it don't take a rocket scientist, and I incorporate by reference everything people said about housing. But we need to merge. One day the system is going to work. But until then, we need to merge your computerized system with the people on the ground that's got some street smarts, so that instead of waiting until someone else dies, because I guarantee you it will happen, and it's been happening, but put with the team, and I'll close with this. All of those teams that come out got to have available housing so that they can take someone from right here, right now, into some type of housing. Now, if the person, once they get into housing, we've done our level best. So I thank you. I'll be back in front of you again, but I'm just talking the truth that I witnessed with my 2 eyes.
Thank you
very much.
All right.
Jerry Jones, I think you called my name a little differently. If I could speak on item 1.
Okay.
Jerry Jones with the Inner City Law Center. I just wanted to echo support for this plan. It's a strategic, thoughtful plan. It's not a perfect plan, and the committee will have an opportunity to strengthen aspects such as related to domestic violence and criminalization. But this, we feel, is the right framework for action. It strikes the right balance in some short-term strategies that are needed and a long-term emphasis on housing. And most importantly, it stresses the need to identify new sources of revenue to address this crisis. Washington, D.C. has absolutely no intention of providing the level of resources that this city needs to deal with its homelessness crisis. And so unless, in coordination with the county, this body and your colleagues come up with the kind of resources that are recommended in this report, we will continue to see the deplorable conditions of homelessness in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes. No, Wayne, you got a general public comment card, not an item 1. You don't have a card. We'll call you for general public comment.
And the number 1.
So that concludes public comment on item 1. We'll continue item 1 until our next meeting. I do want to note that we did make a motion and agree on moving the El Nino specific funds forward. So I want to make make sure we make a note of that before we go into general public comment. Are there any other comments for the order, Mr. Clerk?
We don't.
Excellent, thank you. So general public comment, we have Ruth Sarnoff, Wayne from Encino, and Yvonne Autry.
You know, during the time, Ruth Sarnoff, during the time of Katrina, there was an offer by Cuba to send fully equipped hospital units to New Orleans and to help out with what was going on there. We didn't have relations at the time, and it was refused. And many people died because it was refused. Now we have a opening of relationship with Cuba. We should take advantage of that and have that at least up here to pursue. We should enlist the LA Unified School District, the National Nurses Union, which worked on Ebola and went all the way to Africa, and they're some of the best, wonderful people in the world. We should look for the people who are involved with negotiating things and trying to get people working together. And we have some city-trained people.
Thank
and
you.
The last thing I would call for
Thank
is
you.
a moratorium.
There is no more time, Ms. Sarnoff. Thank you.
Now you see what you do. You took my #1 card and done puts it in the trash. Now that ain't the way to treat my brother. See, I was arrested November 10, 2015, so that make me a house Negro. And I just want to talk on the item, but you got to play them games like them Jew motherfuckers upstairs did today. $1.8 billion. Now that's how much money and property you own here in the city. On the 10th floor, I go to Herb West and he give me this. He give me this. So you got $100 million? No, you got $1.8 billion of unsold property that you could cash in and fix the whole problem now. But you got us down here fooling us. My mind knows how to work on 2 levels, the 10th floor and the
That's your
first
time.
floor.
Thank you.
And
Please move for the next speaker.
Again, we just need more time. Again, I object to the engineering, the civil engineering of homelessness to provide a gene pool for genetic experiments, for mind control experiments. It's a rich melanated gene pool, especially of melanated black people. I also object to the engineering of homelessness, which places women at a vulnerability for the use of sex trafficking, sex slaves, which the CIA avails themselves of, and then, of course, incriminating and murdering the women and labeling them justifiably as crazy, crack-headed whores, the majority, of course, being black women that they use in their sacrificial ritual, whether it's Masonic, alcohol, tobacco, firearm, mafia, or what have you. I also object to and also not to mention or notwithstanding the fact that they're using as organ donors. This is a business. This is a business. Why in one of the richest cities in the world are there so many homeless people? This is the homeless capital, the largest number of homeless people anywhere. You're making money.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up. Members, if there are no other comments, we are adjourned for this Committee on Housing and Homelessness and Poverty.